The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everybody to the webinar on job application systems. What helps and what doesn't. This is part of the Boost Your Career webinars that are co-sponsored by Sue Mentors and Tulane University. Today you'll be hearing from me, Sue Griffey, also known as Sue Mentors. So we're going to be answering some questions. What are job application systems? How do they vary? What's important? The whole point of this and the other Boost Your Career webinars we've been doing are that you don't just focus on a tool like the resume, in this case the resume scanning system. You need to be able to talk to your resume. But in this case, we're giving you pointers to make sure you can also get the right information into a job application system in the right way so that you get a fair chance at getting called for an interview and getting hired. Let's look at what an ATS is. This is an applicant tracking system. And before we start into what this is, I want to thank Julie Bechtold and Amanda Munoz from Waubonsee Community College in Illinois. Julie and Amanda's presentation on this topic came to me via another professional colleague, and when I contacted Julie about using their slides, she was very generous and said yes, they'd be happy to share them. In fact, you'll see the link that's here. If you go there, they have a whole package of 5 different steps to help their students get through the job searching process. So why do you not hear back when you apply for jobs? Most people, I think, nowadays understand, but it's worth emphasizing. There are what people mostly call an ATS, these applicant tracking systems, that look for keywords in your resume. But you also need to know that sometimes formatting features and even things like spelling errors can prevent the automated scanning system's ability to see the experience you have. On the left, they've put in the logos for all sorts of systems. And I want to talk about the top middle, Connexa. I actually went to look that up because I'd heard of it before, and it's already been bought up by IBM. So be aware, one of the things we'll be talking about later is these systems are constantly changing. These systems are based on algorithms, but even more than that, they're getting more sophisticated with AI as well. They scan a resume looking for keywords, phrases, and then they score and rank applicants. And this will help HR and recruiters look at what they're doing in hiring for a specific position, but also may give them tools for other things, such as looking at how long it takes to hire a person, for example. Companies use them, obviously. It saves them time, it automates the process, and if any of you were applying for jobs a decade or more ago before we had these systems, it was pretty arduous because you had to write out an application, usually when you went into the company, if they even called you, or you sent something in that maybe you got a Word file on their website in the last decade and sent it back with your resume and a cover letter by mail. So I think you all probably have a sense of this, but this is what happens. You have an online job application where you're usually cutting and pasting information into an application form. And then you have your resume that's a Word document that you've crafted to show your strengths. It goes through the algorithm and gets put into what is called the employer's view. There, the employer's dashboard. And that may look like this as they begin to look at a specific position that they're trying to fill. In this case, you'll see the system that's being used assigns a score for the candidate's match. It adds the years of experience, including months, and we'll be emphasizing that again later. That's important to have month and year. And then it also will show where there are keyword matches for relevant skills. What's important to remember in the applicant tracking system is it's basically a very large database that's storing information that then powers the ranking and the searching. But as the first bullet says, employers may not ever see your resume. They may go into the column where it's summarized according to the variables on the left, the things that the applicant tracking system is looking for. And it may be that an employer will go only for people who've ranked above 8.5 or 9 as matches. Employers can adjust that, but this is what you need to understand employers are looking at. They aren't necessarily looking at your resume directly, at least not initially. As a reminder, we also have another webinar on cover letters and resumes, which actually untangles what information you include in each of those documents and where you put it. But the important thing about that and today's discussion is that the position description is the basis. So what you'll often see, and in Julie and Amanda's slides they call keywords, I call them more keyword phrases, and you'll see these in yellow here, and the webinar talks about this much more in detail, using the position description as the basis for tailoring your resume. Before we go on, I just want to mention that I have approval from all the mentees whose work I'm showing as examples to share them with you, and I've tried to blind them as much as I can to not give away their personal information and their names, but they've been very generous about sharing their work with you all. So let's look at what you should do and what you should avoid doing. This is what you're going to see at the end. 2 separate screens that actually summarize all of these tips, with the red in as the don't do's and the blues as the things you want to pay attention to. So you'll be able to see them in full color at the end. Let's start with format first. Avoid resume templates from online aggregators. You'll see 2 on the left here with the red X through them. A lot of them have fancy formatting, such as white text on black background. ATSs can manage that sometimes, but they also have graphics here that you don't want to do. On the right was a resume I was asked to review. I think she tried to make it very fancy, put her picture in, put in 2 columns. Many of these things are now not only not desirable, they'll make it difficult for the resume scanning system to find the information that needs to go into the database so you can be matched. So let's look at the do's and don't do's. And the don't do's are on the left usually, and the do's are on the right, so that you get a comparison. So first of all, no photo. You can see the red X at the top left. If they want a photo, they're going to find you because they're going to search for you anyway. And if you follow the guidance that I give and many others, you want to have your LinkedIn URL there as well, and they'll go look at that. You also don't need the title box for your summary paragraph or what this person called professional profile. Do be careful about color use and try to be cognizant of the trend a few years ago where everything turned into gray or dark gray rather than black. Do not use lighter than black color, especially on section titles. And you'll see this more on the template on the right. But on the right is a template that's laid out in 2 full pages. And on the left, you'll see a person has what looks like a fairly crowded resume and also has 2 columns. Don't use columns and don't use an underlying table format. This makes it difficult, apparently, for an ATS to find information despite you having section headings in there. Let's turn to fonts and facings. You want to use what's called a sans serif font. It makes your resume look much more modern. Many style guides that I still see from organizations and the federal government call for a serif font like Times Roman, but move on to something like Calibri Arial or Tahoma. You can find a sans serif font and you'll just notice that it will also be easier for the reader to read it. Font size should be 11 or 12 point, no bigger. Section titles, 1 point bigger. and you bold them and you can capitalize them if you want. And header, you don't need it any bigger than 2 points above the body font. The days of trying to be eye-catching with a printed resume on someone's desk or at a recruiting fair are long gone. You just need to save the space for getting as much information in 2 pages as you comfortably can. Margins, I recommend that you follow the standard 1 inch on all 4 sides, but the minimum is 1 inch on the left and the top. And you'll see that if you go back to the previous page, there's actually arrows that show that. And make sure that your line spacing is 1 inch. Not 1.15, because that actually, if you use that, then that makes your section headers not stand out as much. And not 0.9 inch, because it crowds the line just a little bit too much and makes it difficult to read. You'll see more for the template that I gave you on the left, on the right, when we talk about standard section headings. Avoid characters and symbols as much as possible. On the left in the red box, you'll see a line that's a separating line. It came into vogue about 4 or 5 years ago. And in this case, the line could look like a 1 before the 111 or at the end of the 3331. So just avoid those. It's better just to use a tab or spacing to space it out visually. You can use 2 asterisks if you want. Very simple keyboard characters. On the right, you'll see someone who used a template. She used a phone icon, email icon, location icon, and a website icon. And she also used a map to show where she had worked globally. It's probable that an ATS may pick up your phone number and your email because of what it would be looking for, a string of numbers that's at least 10 places long, or your email that has a separator with the @ sign. I don't know, because I don't see those underlying algorithms, but it definitely cannot distinguish all the countries in Africa that this person has worked from a very small graphic. So avoid using these, make your resume as clean as possible, and we'll be talking about that as we continue to go through. It's important that you don't put anything in the header. The header is that part of using Word or other word processing document where you have to actually go up and insert information that isn't the main body of the text. Header and footer access is usually separate. You don't want to do this for 2 reasons. Number 1, if you use a Word document and you send a Word document, the ATS does not read any information in the header. So the fancy formatted document that you see the thumbnail of on the left, the top blue box shows that that was where her name was in the header. So her name would have been missing. And on the second page, just as you can see from the second blue box down, it becomes then very crowded. You can see on the second box, the person put her name and page 2. And so immediately the person reading is going to be looking at her name in page 2, which is not important information. It is important for them to go directly to what her work that she's describing was. Readability is important, and readability is how much printed space and white space there is on a page, and it's the balance of it. So these 2 pictures show probably about the same amount of text, but the spacing, the use of bullets, and the use of separators are very different. The before and after, the before just looks a little cramped and busy, and also isn't formatted correctly because the person's next job is on the end of page 1. You want to be careful about things like that. But I recommend that you always either do a view or a print using the 2-page per sheet view. You can do it in PDF. You can also do it in, it's easy to do it in Word. When you start to print it, you can do a 2-page per sheet. And look and see if your balance of white and printed space is the way you want it to be. It's much more comfortable and much easier to pull out from this person on the left. Now you can see clearly her education, her experience, and she also has her bio para up front. It's not a summary of qualifications. It's actually a story that weaves together her experience, what she's done, and why she's relevant for the work she's applying for. Let's move on to content now. Here's what you want to do in your header and heading information, and the heading is different from the header. The heading is the contact name and contact information that you put at the top of your resume, and this is directly from the sample template that I showed you a couple slides ago. Make sure you always put your degrees after your name at the very top. Only use one address, and including your zip code, because recruiters who use LinkedIn Premium will recruit by zip code, not by city or state necessarily. And make sure you have only one email address. And I make this recommendation because even when people leave graduate school, for example, and keep their graduate affiliation email, they will put a Gmail address on their resume as well as their, for example, Tulane address. It's very confusing. People don't know which one you want to use and which one you should use. And also, just to go back to previous webinars, you'll see this recommended over and over again. Make sure you have consistency between what's on your resume and what's in your LinkedIn profile. So speaking of LinkedIn, always put your LinkedIn profile on your heading information. Why is this? Number one, it shows that you have it. Number two, it makes it easy for the person to click on that link and find you, and they will. It just saves them from typing your name in, especially if you have a common name like Susan Smith. It will make it very easy for them, not even with a middle initial, to find you. But here's something you really need to pay attention to when preparing your resume, but a variety of documents. It's common practice now to put in a hyperlink, that is a link to a website, in the text that describes it, rather than putting the hyperlink itself because it's shorter. For example, in this case, LinkedIn, you see in the red box at the bottom, they've written LinkedIn URL. If you use that, you will find that the hyperlink, the actual link to where it needs to go, doesn't always stay. Even when you get into a PDF document, sometimes it gets lost. So in place of, as you'll see on the right, LinkedIn, use your actual LinkedIn profile. And just a suggestion about something we talked about in previous webinars. If your LinkedIn profile says Sue Griffey 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, whatever, it usually has a long number on it. LinkedIn allows you to edit that, so take advantage of that and shorten your LinkedIn profile. Okay, standard section titles. We see on the left, the one in the red box is called Work History. It's not clear that the ATS is going to recognize work history as your experience. IT knowledge may not serve well for understanding whether IT skills is the same as IT knowledge. So on the right, you see the resume you saw before with a cleaner version and separate sections. Now, in this case, in the teal that I outlined, she has separate sections. The simpler, the better. Education, experience. I always tell people, don't write professional experience, because number one, it should be all your experience, and that can include volunteer work. And there's a webinar for that too, if you want to know how to count volunteer work. The most helpful you can be is to use common section titles. One comment about putting in education. You can put it in the front or you can put it in the back. It's becoming more common to put it in the back. But one important thing is you do not need GPA or coursework in your resume. GPA, the only time that I would include it is the example I have inserted in the bottom right. Here's someone who was within a couple months of graduating, and she put in her degree and her date and her GPA, because undergraduate degrees and jobs that people get after those sometimes do ask you for GPA information. But the minute she gets her first job, that should be off the list. Okay, you've seen this template before. Here are some section headers that are commonly used, that I've used with people that to revamp their resumes and CVs, and ways that you can combine some of your, what I call intellectual property, the products that you develop from the knowledge and skills that you bring to a job. So they range the gamut from publications all the way to business proposals you've been successful in writing to secure new funding. Another area that is part of your professional development, but isn't commonly recommended when I read online blogs, recruiters, hear webinars from other people who talk about resumes. My recommendation is that you need to focus on the title of what you did and for how long you did it before you tell me where you worked. Because even if you're at Google or Intel, if you're in HR at Google or Intel, it's going to be very similar to Google or Intel, to HR at companies I've worked at and even smaller companies. The reason you want to do this is just look at the left and go down the left-hand column. The conventional wisdom says a recruiter or a reviewer will look at your resume first page or first screen and will go down the column in 6 to 7 seconds. What jumps out? The bolded text, not necessarily the italicized text. So make it easy for people to understand what you've done. And if you've been on webinars with me before, you've heard me say, don't make me do your work for you. That's why you want to make sure you put in your the duration of what you did. August 2017 to present. Oh, I can see that's just over a year now. May 2017 to August 2017, not even 6 months. It gives people an indication of how long you've been there, and it's easy for them to calculate, as you'll see on the right-hand side, where this person, she bolded her title and her duration, and she bolded also where she worked. But when you go down, you can quickly see that she had the same job title at 2 different locations for now more than 5 years. Here's an opportunity for you to see something that I come across occasionally. It's not frequent enough that it is addressed by recruiters. But if you have multiple jobs at the same company, don't list every job separately with your role first and then the title of the company, but make it easy. So on the left, you'll see that the person whose resume we looked at on the previous slide, she actually worked at Rogosin Institute at 2 different jobs, but it makes it very hard to pull it out. Instead, and here's 2 examples on the right, someone worked at Tulane University, which is a very large university, in 2 different schools, School of Social Work and School of Public Health. So she put there a little roadmap, 2 little bullets that say, this is what I did for this period of time. You can quickly glance and see, oh, she was at Tulane for over 2 decades. And then under that, you indent and use each position to describe what you did. Another person did her select experience and described that she was actually employed by Tulane, but in a non-academic faculty position or non-traditional. And here's how she did listed all of her work. But the first title she gave was Director at the Disaster Resilience Leadership. And you can see clearly she was there for the last 2 years. But when you actually look then at the job description, you see that she had 2 different positions under the academy and for how long. So these are ways that you can group things to guide the reader and give them more information just with your formatting and with what you select to highlight. I've referred to this before, and Julie and Amanda mentioned this in their presentation. Use month and year. The woman on the left did not use months and year, and when I asked her why not, and she said, I think it's much cleaner. And I said, you realize that it's on LinkedIn anyway. If you put your work in LinkedIn, they will make you put a year in, and a month and a year in. So again, don't make me do your work for you. And you can see this is the person on the right. We've already seen this, that you quickly can get a sense of how much time they've been at each job. And just as a comment, the person on the left, her title for her experience is professional career. Again, not clear that that would be a match for an ATS database field. This advice comes from themuse.com. And I thought it was really important because I had not heard about it, but apparently, I think this is about a year old, apparently people were packing there was a recommendation somewhere that someone read and it went viral literally. People would put in the same keyword, in this case accounting, several times, and they would use white font so it wouldn't appear on the printed resume or even on the screen. But as you can see with the enlarged picture on the left, the keyword matches found accounting 4 times. And that will actually, probably, I expect now, if they haven't done it now soon, they would have an algorithm that would bump someone out who had it in multiple uses of the same term. All right, so the resume is all done. Now we've got a clean template. We know the format. We're putting in the content. We checked your previous webinar, and we know what to do, Sue. Well, it's not quite done yet. Don't forget to spell check, grammar check. Grammar check, you can get that in Word. You can also use Grammarly from your browser or other grammar programs. But it's really important that you have good readability. So not just the balance of white space and printed space, but also that your text flows and it isn't stilted, or it isn't, you don't have too long sentences or too short bullets. You want to proofread at least twice. First of all, on the left, you'll see Sarah Basinger, who's my co-facilitator in these webinars. Don't assume that Sarah, who's in career services for alums, all of the Tulane alumni that are out there in the world, or an HR person at your organization, has read your resume or CV in detail. That is not that person's job to do. So you want to find someone who will actually read your resume and give you feedback. This could be a friend, it could be a colleague, but you want them to figure out how it sounds, what are the problems, not just spelling and grammar errors, but flow and even the order of things. And then you should become your own copy editor. And you see on the bottom right, there's a URL there from universalclass.com. The most important one, I've heard this before, and I think it does work the best. If you're doing your own copy editing, your own editing, read it backwards from the bottom. And you will soon find that either you find errors, certainly spelling and grammar, but you may even find flow errors. And now we're going to move on to saving and format, because this is also an important part, whether you're sending a resume through a resume scanning system or sending it to someone. Topresume.com, I think, helped me understand this. I hadn't thought about this before, but they tell you to take the opportunity to convert your resume from a Word document to a plain text file. And what will happen is, if you convert it and there are unusual characters or formatting gets lost, or there's a lot of, sometimes when you use an apostrophe in HTML coding language, you'll get the %sign. You've probably seen that in browser searches. That's the same kind of thing you're looking for to make sure that plain text format makes a readable resume, and one that would be ATS compliant. So let me show you the instructions for it, thanks to Sam Nolan at the top, about what you do in Word. And here is part of a resume on the left that's formatted in Word. And here's what I did when I saved it last night in plain text. You can see that there's spacing there. You can see that all the text is there. Bullets have been changed to an asterisk. So it's a readable document if it needs to be, and that means that it's ATS compliant. And finally, when you're saving it, always save it as both a Word and a PDF file. Why is this? Because as topresume.com said better than me, PDF is not the most ATS friendly type. And we, at least in my last decade of working with people applying for jobs, people would save things in PDF because it does preserve formatting, which helps if you're sharing a Word document where people may have their settings set differently. So for example, maybe the number of lines on the page, the footer, the bottom margin would be larger, and so maybe your description of your job would be split up. So now, and people got in the habit of asking for a PDF document in the ATS, but many places don't specify. And the recommendation right now, and not just from topresume.com, is that you submit it in Word unless they specify it. Part of this is because, as you saw, maybe remember from Julie and Amanda's slides from Waubonsee College, there were at least 20 different logos there of different applicant tracking systems that were out in the electronic world for people to use. So you don't know when you're applying to an organization what the underlying system is. And I would say it's probably not worth it for you to try to figure out. The important thing is for you to be able to submit it in a way that it can be scanned and then looked at by a human once you get past the screening process. And always, 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 please use a descriptive file name like I've shown below. People who are getting the information in the automated tracking, applicant tracking systems are also having your resume that you've attached to the application system. It's going into a document management system. So they can find it, likelihood they can find it because it'll be attached to something in the database with your first name, and it'll say, here's the resume that this person submitted. But there are people who are managing, there are companies who are using applicant tracking systems that are managing the document management, the cover letter, the resume themselves, and they're saving it on their hard drive. So, or to an intranet. So if you've called your resume something like resume for job at company X, they're not going to have a clue who that is. And you may not get called back because they can't figure out where your resume went. Perhaps an extreme case, but just be descriptive. All right. I told you you'd see these again, and now you do. The blue text is what you should do, including, I just realized I made a spelling error, so forgive me. And the red text is what you should avoid doing. So here's all the formatting tips that we talked about in one easy way to view them. And all the content tips, including all the way through saving. So again, here's the things that you should focus on, and here's the things that you should avoid that are in red. And finally, just to remind you, here's a sample resume format and section title, different section titles, so that you can easily construct a resume that's going to be relevant, a resume template that's going to be relevant for you. Now, if you'd like to know much, much more about applicant tracking systems, then look at the URL on the left, and that is a very detailed explanation of the way that these ATSs work. I found it very interesting, but there were parts of it that are very nerdy that you may not be interested in. And on the right, JobScan has an overview document with 8 things you need to know. They're both from JobScan, and they're very readable and they're very helpful. So as we wind up, let's talk about the key points. You need to be prepared each time you apply, because job application systems, they keep changing. The algorithms change, AI is making more inroads, and they're improving what they're able to do and how they are doing it. So you need to re-educate yourself, understand and follow the latest recommendations, and don't try to game the systems. You need to take control of your resume by using and reusing your own resume template. Become your own editor, but also call a friend. Ask someone to proofread for you as well. It will be very helpful. And finally, and a point that we make quite often, all of this is in service to your professional development. So remember, although today we talked about how you make your resume stand out and be compliant with an ATS, it's not just the resume. You still have to be able to talk to and write to your achievements and experience, which is ultimately what will get you a job for the next step in your career path. So once again, thanks for attending this webinar. Don't forget to check our channel for the many other Boost Your Career webinars and other professional development webinars that are available from the Tulane Alumni Career Services. They make them available to everybody who gets on the channel, and you'll find a wealth of information there. And please contact Sarah or Sue for more information on this topic, or if you have ideas about another webinar you'd like.